this particular image here that you see, Asclepius, he was one of the founding fathers of Western medicine. And I will talk about him later because he plays a very important role within Greek mythology and how Jung actually came up with the notion of the wounded healer. Now, as usual, I do want to give a little bit of a promotion to all my books. I'm sure you have most of them. Now, I've been on a very interesting journey this year because last year, when I launched volume 3, much of what I've been talking about, I realize has branched off, has come off the back of the work that I've done in volume 3, in which I explore the psyche and the subtle. Now, I have made a promise and a commitment to everybody. You can see that there's a gap there, and that gap is volume 2. I am going to now dedicate all my time to now completing volume 2. So what I will do is I'll making an announcement of it. So future webinars will probably be based on what I've been working on within the volume 2, which will look at the science and the therapeutics of aromatherapy. But this year has been a wonderful journey, continuing on and exploring what I refer to as the psyche and the subtle. Now, as I was saying before, the notion of the wounded healer, the concept of the wounded healer has its origins within Greek mythology, but also within a lot of shamanic traditions and shamanic practices. And the images of the wounded healer permeate religion, philosophy, and art, and now plays a very important role in underpinning psychotherapy, counseling, and medicine. It was Jung who first used the term wounded healer. And the best way to think about it, now I've got to emphasize this, and I'll be talking about this in the Aromatherapy and Archetypes Masterclass a lot, is Jung is more referring to conditions of the soul, diseases of the soul. And he believed that it is the diseases of the soul that give us the best training to be a healer. This very notion is the concept of the wounded healer. And basically, he drew on the mythology of Chiron and the myths of Chiron, and how the wounded healer has now become, and I believe this, one of the most important and fundamental archetypes in human history, and especially within modern medicine. Nowadays, it's also taken on a new context, and I think a very important one, and that is of healthcare professionals who experience and are suffering from burnout and exhaustion and trauma. And the pandemic has been a very trying time for many health professionals. Now, I will touch on briefly now the notes. As usual, you'll get a link to a very detailed blog that I've put together, and the notes there, the blog provides a lot of the information that underpins the presentation and what I'm going to talk about. I realize that if I wanted to discuss in detail the entire content of what I've put together, it'd probably take 2 to 3 hours. So I'm going to keep this down to 1 hour. But the idea in Greek mythology were that the healers were portrayed as being inseparable from their wounds. And it was the Greek god and healer Chiron and Asclepius that were themselves wounded. Chiron was is a centaur, and he was the master of the healing arts. And I don't know, these Greek gods are pretty mean people sometimes, and they did some terrible things. But for some reason, Hercules had inflicted an injury, hitting Chiron with a poison arrow. And while Chiron did not die, he experienced pain for the rest of his life. But in the meantime, Chiron was had been left had become responsible for Asclepius, and he mentored, he was Asclepius' mentor in becoming a healer. And when Asclepius grew up, he himself was struck by lightning while trying to raise the dead. So these myths have underpinned, and it was Jung that wanted to understand and observe how myths and stories are reflected within the archetypes that we refer to. And indeed, as I'm saying here, the metaphor for the wounded healer is now being adopted by healthcare professionals, not just in psychology and psychotherapy, but within nursing, within medicine, teaching, social work, and mental health, just to name a few. It's very interesting. There was a recent paper that was put together, and this is in the notes, which talks, and this was done here in Queensland at the Queensland University of Technology, and they studied and explored the notion of the wounded healer and how they could use it to support their students within social care and in their counselling and counselling professions. And so they used this notion and incorporated it within their studies, because they realized that many of the students that were entering social welfare were actually had this connection with the notion of the wounded healer. Now, as I was saying before, there is a real crisis happening in hospitals right now. And this was a recent article that was published on the 20th of August this year. And it was a doctor, a contagious diseases doctor in Victoria that wrote this article. In here, he states that 2/3 of Victorian healthcare workers are burnt out. 46% of the nurses surveyed have considered leaving the profession. This is a very, very trying time and challenging time. And certainly, this highlights that the notion of the wounded healer is very, very prevalent and relevant right now as we speak. Please check out this article. There's the link to it if you want to read it in detail. Now, before we go and delve further into the wounded healer, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of the archetypes. I'm sure we're all familiar with them. And I want to keep this as simple as possible. We'll be spending a lot more time on the weekend examining the archetypes and their relevance to healing and the relevance to aromatherapy. I suppose the archetypes are seen really as these, it gives meaning to images and narratives which appear across a diverse range of human cultures throughout history. And these are similar images and narratives, and we see a pattern. So in that respect, the archetypes reflect an aspect of human experience that is universal. The act of caring gives rise to the caregiver archetype. The act of being passionate, falling in love, gives rise to the lover archetype. The archetype associated with being a leader, with being a ruler, being in charge of people, making decisions, gives rise to the ruler archetype. So these archetypes don't really change, irrespective of the period in which we speak. And it's very interesting that we nowadays, writers talking about archetypes have come up with new terms to describe the archetypes. But in one sense, irrespective of how you label the archetype, there is a very clear pattern occurring throughout history. Now, how these archetypes may be associated with this human experience, which may be related to biologically based processes, but they could also be related to birth, to attachment, to desire, imagination and creativity, to illness, to suffering, and even death. And so these patterns, these experiences that arise are often reflected within cultures, myths, within the folk tales, within arts, and within dreaming. And this is what Jung was observing. And he saw these patterns and observed them and began to label them. It's fascinating, so exciting. Now, I will be referring to a couple of gems of books, which if you are involved in the healing profession, I will strongly be recommending that you get hold of. Now, I'll talk about Smink a little bit later, but he reminds us that these archetypes are dynamic. And just as I was talking before about them, irrespective of the period in which we speak, we can redefine them however we want. So here he's relating to the notion of the caregiver, which in order to be a wounded healer, perhaps there is a very strong link with the caregiver. Now, whether you're a nurse, firefighter, physician, an educator, a chaplain, a coach, a safety officer, he suggests that the connection between them is all the caregiver. So we see how the archetypes, they remain, the key archetypes remain constant, but at the same time we can assign different activities, different roles to them, because it's more the underlying characteristics of the caregiver that are important, and that is the common consistent factor between all of these vocations. Now, this is very important to remember this statement. Smink also suggests that we are all wounded healers, because he's saying if we are human, that guarantees that at some point we are going to experience suffering. We are going to experience limitations and imperfections. Now, the ancients struggled with this notion, and we still struggle with it now. To be mortal, as Smink suggests, implies boundaries, imperfections, and woundedness. These wounds, now this is also very important, may be emotional, psychological, or spiritual, and they may involve mental health disorders, depression, feelings of alienation, post-traumatic stress, abuse, or a lack of meaning in one's life. Used as a metaphor, the notion of being wounded can refer to something as complex as a broken relationship, a loss of reputation, divorce, a loss of employment, or it could involve illness. It could be a physical illness. It could be emotional, psychological, or spiritual. And Smink reminds us that some wounds will heal and others will not. And this is what's the wounded healer has to remember. Chiron was inflicted with a wound where he had pain for the rest of his life, but this was the catalyst for him to become an even better healer. Jung also now looks at this notion of being wounded and suggests that if we do not experience being wounded, he suggests that this is a very important part of what he refers to as the individuation process, the process of self-actualization. And we'll explore this later as well. Jung reflected on his own personal suffering and search for meaning and a desire to heal. And this became, and he realized that for personal growth to occur, we have to acknowledge our weakness, our vulnerabilities, and our woundedness. And by doing this, and we will struggle with it, this will lead to the insight and wisdom to be able to heal others. Now, this is the first book. If you are a health professional, this only came out this year, or if you are interested, if you are working as and your role is as a carer, this book is so important. It's very easy to read. It is almost written in a workbook format. And I think Omar Reda has done an incredible job. And I don't even want to necessarily tell you his own story as a wounded healer, but he is a psychotherapist and a doctor. He works with people with trauma. He himself had experienced an incredible level of trauma. But what he has found, what he has identified as a psychiatrist and a trauma counselor is that so many health professionals are suffering from what we are dealing with the concept of the wounded healer. And he refers to it as burnout. And this is exactly what that article in The Guardian that I referred to was talking about as well. Now, what Reda suggests, he starts off by saying, whenever you feel, whenever you get to the point of exhaustion, wherever you get to that point of burnout, rather than talking about their needs, carers and proactively taking steps to deal with and challenge the reason why they're feeling like that, the caregiver might often take their fatigue and all their negative energy out on themselves or on their loved ones. And he explains that the caregiver fatigue and the toxic stress takes such a toll on the soul. Very powerful words that he uses. That's the exact words that he uses. They take their toll on their soul, on the physical and mental health, on the family connections, on social life, and our ability to be at our best. And of course, he says, and out of all the archetypes, the caregiver, I think this is a real chosen dedication, one that we are so passionate about. A healthy caregiver is one they will blossom when given the chance to meet their full potential. And he emphasizes, and a part of the book is also focusing on strategies that you can do to deal with a lot of the challenge that are probably being experienced by healthcare professionals. So Reda suggests that self-care, so important. It should not be an elusive goal or an empty promise that is preached but not practiced. And it should not be considered a luxury or be a source of guilt or shame. Because this is where I get very excited, because I believe that the essential oils, aromatherapy, can play such an important role in self-care and nurturing the wounded healer. We're going to finish off. I've only chosen 9 essential oils that I think are the epitome and embody embody all the characteristics that are needed to help the wounded healer. Now, Reda referred to this book that he says was incredible, and I actually got hold of the book only 2 weeks ago, and I've read it from front to cover, and it is absolutely gorgeous. This book focuses on the soul of caregiving. So once again, for those of you that are an aromatherapist, for those of you that are healers, for those of you who are healthcare professionals, this together with Reda's book will be a catalyst for your life. So this is such an amazing book that I've been referring to, Edward Smink, and I will talk about him a lot more this weekend. Now, in the soul of caregiving, Smink sees caregiving as an act of love and as a spiritual practice. And he refers to our response to trauma as those shadows. But these shadows invite us, and we are depleted. We need to notice them and embrace them with compassion. When you meet a shadow, he says, practice forgiveness. Smink, however, says that when the shadow takes over, the caregiver becomes the caretaker. And I think that's happened to all those health professionals, so all those nurses who are considering leaving the profession. They would have chosen the role of caregiver because they're very passionate about that, but their role now has become that of the caretaker. And when you lose that soul of caregiving, it just becomes a job, a paycheck, and it becomes a burden. More importantly, it can lead to burnout, which leads to what Smink says, to soul ache. And this can only be dealt with through restorative practices, honest, serious soul searching, and a renewed commitment to self-care. Once again, referring to self-care. The greatest challenge for a lot of healers may be to accept their brokenness as a blessing rather than as a curse. And this is exactly what Jung was saying. In order to grow, we need to accept these challenges and embrace them, accept this woundedness as a blessing. Now, Smink, very interesting, and this is a very important feature, important thing that I need to talk about. Do not get caught up in one single archetype. Now, there are many archetypes, and I'm not going to have the time tonight to talk about each one of them, but I will be talking about the 12 main archetypes that were defined, identified by Jung, because I still think these archetypes are very relevant today. We might want to label them differently, but they're still the same. But Smink says that we should never get caught up on associating ourselves with just one single archetype, or worse, as he said, identifying ourselves with that archetype in which we lose a sense of who we really are. Now, he says, for example, if we just identify with the caregiving qualities, the qualities associated with the caregiver archetype, we risk burnout, we become fatigued, and this leads to resentment of ourselves and those that we are meant to be caring for. He refers to his own story of how he recovered his soul, in which he refers to as the interior spark within. He had to learn, for example, he said, to cultivate the qualities of the hero archetype. And this allowed him to experience that determination, the discipline, and the courage to establish firm boundaries for the sake of his overall health and well-being. He then also says he drew on the strength of another archetype, the explorer, who helped him to envisage new pathways and to evaluate different options and make the appropriate choices when necessary. So part of what we'll be doing this weekend is be looking at how you can draw on those resources of the various archetypes in your life. And I will challenge you to examine where you are in life now and how you can draw on the strength of the various archetypes to help you. This was very, very interesting, because Smink identified himself as the caregiver archetype. However, he realized that he needed to draw on the strength and the qualities of all these other archetypes to help him manage to become a caregiver again, rather than a caretaker. Now, this is a very recent paper that was published in a journal of practical oncology. And I have to share this with you. In this article that Morgan Gonzalez wrote, she refers to the M&M effect. I just said, this is so interesting, I have to share this. Now, Morgan Gonzalez, as an oncology clinician, this is in her little introduction to this paper that she's written. She says she was at this conference, like I imagine a lot of specialty healthcare professionals go to, and there was one of the presenters was speaking about the wounded healer. Now, she said, I must admit at this moment, I just switched off. I really felt that this was not relevant to my practice, and how could oncologists even experience this notion of a wounded healer? As she said, and this is quotes, I prided myself on being able to hold the boundaries with my patients and with myself. My response to this was, well, if you can't handle it, then you should not be doing this work. This was her exact comments at the beginning of her story that she tells in this paper. And then she goes on to explain what this M&M effect was. I was hard on the outside, but I was soft on the inside. I had allowed the M&M effect to occur, and it was impacting on my practice and her relationship with her patients. She had become hardened and unable to connect with them. And she said, I could identify myself as somebody who had seen the worst and could deal with whatever came my way. And she was very proud of not being vulnerable and open to her patients. But then one day, an encounter with one patient changed all this. And her exact words were, I had to realize this was not pride, but a wound so open and deep that I had just continued to put salt on it until it developed a hard crust. Gonzalez then goes on to talk about how she dealt once she realized that she was experiencing what it is to be a wounded healer. She then went about to how would she heal herself? She focused, one thing that she did was focus on mindfulness. And I had to share this with you because it's some wonderful, wonderful advice. She basically said, by mindfulness can create that deep presence, which allows us to become aware of our wounds. And by doing so, it helps us to understand who we are and helps us to make better connection with others. To identify your own wounds and become healed, we need to intentionally be present with ourselves, she says. If we have intention, purpose, and mindfulness in our own time with ourselves and with our patients, then we can heal from our wounds. Now, this is a very important part of self-care. Healing our wounds can decrease burnout and professional fatigue. And we must find a way to become whole through this sadness that we might experience, the trauma or the death that we see daily. Such beautiful words of wisdom, and it's such a beautifully told story that Gonzalez talks about. Now, what are the characteristics of the wounded healer? Some of the characteristics that have been identified of the wounded healer are: you are a lifelong seeker. You have a very strong sense of purpose. People will call on you when in need. You've probably been helping people since you were a child, and you always look for an experience as an opportunity for growth, all experiences. And you seem to find calm in chaos. These were some of the characteristics identified of the wounded healer. Now, we cannot talk about the wounded healer without talking about the dark night of the soul. And the Dark Nights of the Soul, written by Thomas More. This is just one of many wonderful books written about this. And but I found Thomas More's very accessible and very easy for me to relate to. But he talks about, once again, that the dark night of the soul is not some psychological syndrome, but it's a quest for meaning during life's darkest moments. And certainly the pandemic, for some, we may have experienced what is referred to as the dark night of the soul. And it's an opportunity to restore oneself. And More suggests that using such time, such a period, as an opportunity to reflect and delve into our soul's deepest needs, so we can find new understanding of life's meaning. As I've said, the pandemic has changed our lives in so many ways, and I'm sure many of us have encountered what is termed the dark night of the soul. It may refer to something that has changed our life in a profound way. And it's more to do with how we respond to this event. It could be something like a major illness, it could be a death in the family, or it can even relate to a loss of a job. How do we find the strength to deal with this situation? And how do we learn to grow from this experience, the dark night of the soul? Or do we just end up becoming angry, bitter, and withdrawn from the world? Moore goes on to say, not being open to the beauty of the world and life, we can embrace the dark night of the soul and transcend the mediocrity of life. Interesting, as a psychologist himself, and also having a background as a spiritual teacher, he suggests that psychology and spiritual teaching help us to explore every aspect of living a healthy life, but they rarely help us overcome mediocrity. Now, I love this term, and this concept of mediocrity I want to explore a little bit further. And Moore refers to the mediocrity of life as the failure to let the inner brilliance shine. When the inner genius shows itself in personality, in a way of life, in our values and expression, mediocrity disappears. Mediocrity is the cloud that prevents the spark from being seen. Once again, he refers to the same term that Smink used, this spark. Mediocrity is an attitude of do only what is necessary and sufficient. You see here the connection between the wounded healer, the feeling of not having an essence worth showing. However, it involves, and mediocrity often involves, giving up the possibility of an outstanding life. The dark night of the soul will play a very important role in transcending mediocrity and what Moore refers to as encountering the numinous. I love this term. And this is where we will delve into aromatherapy, because this was the premise of volume 3 of the Complete Guide to Aromatherapy, because I believe that essential oils allow us to deal with the dark night of the soul and to experience the numinous that Moore talks about. The term numinous, and it should be used more often, is like describing the mysterious power of life. It's like a sense of awe that we experience. We see this in nature, we see this in people, we see this in works of art, and it inspires this sense of awe. It is at the heart of a spiritual experience, and it is at the heart of what we experience of falling in love. Now, I love the way that Moore quotes, I think he's from the Middle Ages, his philosopher Marsilio Ficone, who says that we should wear glittering jewelry to remind us of this inner spark so we can overcome this feeling of mediocrity. These jewels and sparkling stones are like the lights of the star, and they light up our soul. Now, we often have certain stones associated, for example, lapis lazuli, associated with the Buddha, who represented the healing Buddha, who represented the spiritual healing. The great Magi, who brought the infant Jesus gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These are all very special substances which represented the shine and the aroma of the numinous. And exactly this is what I'm suggesting, that all essential oils are like these jewels that Marsilio Ficone is speaking about. And these jewels remind us of our inner spark, or even more, they can awaken that inner spark when we have lost it in the dark night of the soul, or when we have become a wounded healer. Essential oils allow us to experience the numinous. As I said, I love this word. It's a feeling of awe. And just go, if you've got an oil close by, just grab it right now and smell it. And I'm sure that you will have that feeling of awe. And by the way, I've just got here a blend that we're probably not going to go ahead with, because not everybody knows the name, understands the name of it, and my team weren't happy with it. It smells gorgeous. It's called Biophilia Blend. Tell me what you think of biophilia, and I'll not tell you what's in it, but we may not be going ahead with that. But what I'm saying is, when I just smelt that, I felt a sense of awe, and I'm sure whether it was bergamot, sweet orange, rose, ylang ylang, when we experience that feeling of awe, it helps us to, it reconnects us with our passion and with our purpose in life. Moore makes a very bold statement, very powerful and provocative statement. And he knows, I realize that I am far out of step with the times in recommending numinosity rather than health as a goal. Think about that statement. What he's suggesting is we need to take better care of our soul rather than taking care of our health as a goal. The two are very strongly connected. I'm sure you'll agree. Ours, Moore says, is still a therapeutic society that values the removal of symptoms over the soul's sparkle and shine. Very powerful statement. Now, let me start off by introducing you to some essential oils. But let me start off by quoting two people that I admire deeply and have made a significant contribution to aromatherapy, and are brilliant authors. Schnabel is the first one. Kurt says, and I've mentioned this many times before, explains that aromatherapy contributes to the realization of health that no other material science can. It's talking very much like Thomas More. It accepts and integrates the phenomena of the soul. On the other hand, he suggests that the Western allopathic medicine is highly alienating, fear-based, and believes in the separation of the body and soul, whereas aromatherapy seeks to unite the body and the soul. Such beautiful words of wisdom. Susan Fisher-Rizzi also says essential oils reconnect us with our spirituality, when she says that essential oils touch our heart and open the door to our soul. And in doing so, they give us the impetus to search for meaning in our life. If aromatherapy can help the wounded healer, it must, as Thomas More says, allow us to experience the numinous. This is exactly what Schnabel and Fisher-Rizzi are both suggesting that essential oils do. They allow us to experience the numinous. Now, what are some? I decided, okay, can I see some, you know how we see lists of properties often dedicated to essential oils, and those properties give us an indication of what therapeutic activity they have. When I was looking at what I had put together and all other authors referring to subtle aromatherapy, I decided to make a summary of some of the properties of essential oils. Now, it wasn't easy to come up with a single word to describe these properties, but these are some of the terms that I identified and summarized that share among many essential oils that allow us to experience what we refer to as the numinous. They act as a catalyst for transformation. They can help to dissolve emotional blockages. They can prepare us, they focus our mind for meditation and prayer. They can have a purifying effect. They can open our heart to compassion. They integrate compassion and spirituality. They support our intuition. They provide us with psychic protection. They provide us with comfort and love. They often work on the higher energy centers. They often resonate with the heart chakra and promote compassion. And they often support and promote resilience. This was a brief summary. I could have gone on a lot further, but these were some of the key features, key properties that I associated with the more subtle effects of essential oils. Now, oops, sorry, I'm not ready yet. In one way, I'm sure you could agree that we could assign these qualities to almost any essential oil, but I've decided to choose just 9 essential oils to finish off this presentation. There are many more, so I'm sorry if I have not mentioned your favorite essential oil. It was very hard for me to choose these essential oils, but they've resonated with me. And specifically, I was thinking about how these essential oils can help us with the wounded healer, the notion of the wounded healer. I chose Atlas cedarwood. I've listed these alphabetical, so rather than in any order of priority. The key words that come to mind when I think of Atlas cedarwood are strength, courage, and resilience. It's no wonder that Gabriel Moget describes Atlas cedarwood as giving us this immovable strength in times of crisis. You can see why Atlas cedarwood made this list. It helps to calm our mind, and it also prevents us when we are threatened, when we experiencing such powerful emotions that potentially undermine our confidence and morale. Atlas cedarwood will come to the rescue. Often Atlas cedarwood has this very stabilizing influence that Peter Holmes talks about. So when we are feeling a disconnection with our surroundings or within ourselves, Atlas cedarwood once again comes to the rescue. And of course, Robbie Zeck, another brilliant writer and teacher, says Atlas cedarwood brings strength and commitment when we need to make changes in our lives to move forward. Exactly the challenges that a wounded healer will need to deal with. Benzoin, such beautiful, sweet smelling balsamic resin. The key words that come to mind when I think about benzoin is comfort, love, and healing. Healing in a physical sense, but healing in an emotional and also in a spiritual sense. And certainly when we have a look at how it's been described, in subtle aromatherapy, the focus is on it makes us aware of our emotional wounds, past and present, and it begins the process of healing and releasing them. It teaches us to have compassion for ourselves, for our past. It will help us to embrace and accept the woundedness that we may be experiencing so that we can grow slowly and deeply in wisdom. So here, once again, we're talking about what Jung referred to as this growth and a greater awareness of our consciousness, where we slowly grow in wisdom. It allows us to open the heart and the mind, allowing our soul to speak. And it helps us to make choices, Valerie Werewood says, with our heart by reconnecting the inner sanctum of the soul. Cistus. This is a wonderful, wonderful essential oil. Once again, it's a resin, also known as rock rose, by the way. Susan Fisher-Rizzi says that this warm, deep, spicy, soothing scent of cistus conveys this feeling of warmth that deeply affects the soul. And she recommends it for people who've probably experienced a traumatic event, who are feeling cold, empty, or numb. That's why I've said that cistus comforts emotional or spiritual distress. So Robbie Zeck here says that the scent of cistus warms, settles, and quietens the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual body. And of course, it comforts us in times of stress, shock, or an accident, or after any traumatic event. Cypress made the list because for me, there's a very strong sense of direction, and it has this quality which is transformative. It's purifying, and it allows us to embrace change. Here, whenever we are challenged with decisions regarding change, it is cypress that will come to the rescue. Cypress also helps us to have the courage to surrender to our will to a higher purpose. And in doing so, change will occur, healing will occur, and transformation will also occur. And as a result, wisdom. Everlasting. This is one that I know many aromatherapists use the term the wounded, the walking wounded. And this is the term that Valerie Werwood used in describing everlasting. So here for me, the connection that I have with everlasting is one of comfort, alleviating the pain of the soul. Peter Holmes talks about everlasting as having this profoundly purifying and transformative effect on the emotional body and the heart as both an energetic and a spiritual organ. So this is also another essential oil, which I think is very important in helping the wounded healer. Fragonia, a beautiful essential oil from Australia. The best way to describe it is the way that Robbie has described the way that it makes you feel. She states that fragonia is like the candle carrying the light of dignity, nurturing the spirit and helping you to come to terms with resolving any past traumas or unresolved family issues. The best way to describe fragonia is it's comforting. It gives us insight and it's also quite nurturing. It helps us to build resilience as well and bring to us a gift of the power of love. It's such a delightful essential oil and quite unique among all the Myrtaceae essential oils. Melissa definitely made it onto the list of key essential oils to help the wounded healer. Keywords that I think of when Melissa comes to mind is it's comforting. I love the word grace. It seems to introduce a sense of grace. It's insightful, it's revitalizing, and what I also refer to as it makes us aware and connects us with unconditional love. Gabrielle Moja here suggests that Melissa is the oil choice for people who are easily traumatized by confrontation. And they may often manifest their strength by attempting to contain their feelings rather than responding to and expressing their feelings of hurt and anger. So it's not surprising that Melissa oil helps us to release these emotional blocks and to heal wounds that might be caused by very major traumatic experiences such as the death of a loved one. It teaches us that death is the part of life without interfering in that natural grieving process. Melissa is it's an incredible essential oil for the wounded healer. Another essential oil that made the list was myrrh. I love myrrh because it brings this tranquility and harmony, and it's really good when we have this feeling that we're feeling overwhelmed. Patricia Davis here says that myrrh is going to help us get through all these challenging times in life, and it helps us to cope with our physical, emotional, and spiritual wounds. And it not only supports us, but it will protect us, and it will give us that strength to connect with our humanness. Rose. Now here I should have mentioned it's probably more the rose otto that I'm referring to, but the key words for rose once again are unconditional love, emotional harmony, and helping to deal with grief. So rose teaches us the lessons of love. It has this very extraordinary, powerful energy that helps to heal our emotional wounds. And so we can give better and receive love unconditionally. The caretaker becomes the caregiver once again. It helps us to deal with the pain of grief, and it teaches us to forgive others when they hurt us. This is very important for the wounded healer to understand, and it also protects our energy fields. Now, I did say that That's our 9 essential oils. Now, I did say that I would finish off this presentation by looking at creating some essential oil blends. And so I've chosen 4 themes here, and I've worked with those essential oils that I've spoken about, those 9 essential oils. Now, if you're interested, what I've said here is these blends, you could add them directly to a diffuser, or you could add them to a little rollerball bottle in just using some jojoba oil. So 10 mils of jojoba, so using this formula. So the first one, and I actually haven't used all the oils from the 9 oils there. I've snuck in some other oils. But seeking a new direction, something that the wounded healer often needs to consider. This may evoke what we call the explorer archetype. And this is what Smink talked about. He identified himself as the caregiver, but he realized that he needed to draw on the strength of these other archetypes. So the seeking new direction will probably evoke the explorer archetype: cypress, fragonia, atlas cedarwood, and a little bit of neroli. Now, on the other hand, if something to comfort the soul and to protect the soul, I've gone with the more rich, the sweet resin balsamic scent, the benzoin, the cistus, the myrrh, and the rose absolute here. I felt that the rose absolute would definitely act here to comfort the soul and to offer protection for the soul. So these combination of oils would work beautifully for that. On the other hand, to soothe emotional pain, I've chosen everlasting. I've chosen Melissa, lavender, and rose otto. Such a delightful blend to help heal any emotional pain, present or past. There comes a time where, as the wounded healer, you will be feeling spiritually exhausted as well. You cannot see the numinous. You cannot experience that sparkle that Moore talks about. And so this combination of essential oils will help us to, what I've called relieve spiritual exhaustion, helps us to connect, to find that sparkle and to see the numinous. So this blend is sandalwood, frankincense, atlas cedarwood, and cistus. So I'm sure, have fun. Please share with us, share with me your blends that you like to use and how you like to use them. In finishing off, please remember that this weekend is the Aromatherapy and Archetypes Masterclass. It goes for 4 hours. We are doing it. We have a small group coming here in Brisbane where it will be face-to-face, but we will be recording it. So no matter where you are around the world, you can watch it live. But if the time is not convenient, you will be able to then watch it at your own convenient time because you can access the recording. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to reading your feedback, and I hopefully look forward to seeing some of you this Saturday. But once again, thank you so much for attending and watching the presentation on aromatherapy and the wounded healer. I thank you so much. Bye.